50/50 is the BBC's biggest collective action when it comes to increasing women's representation that there's ever been. And it's not the BBC doing it on its own. We've got more than 140 organisations taking part.
How has the digital revolution shaped journalism?
Well, it's shaped it in so many different ways. I don't know where to begin, really. I mean, let's look at it from a tech perspective. You know, before, if you look at the Ukraine war that's unfortunately happening at the moment, if that war was happening, say, 20 years ago, before the digital revolution, even longer now, 30 years, I suppose, before the digital revolution and how we use technology to move information. A report from a war zone would have taken maybe a week, 2 weeks to get back and be on your TV, whereas now it's almost instantaneous. It could be, you know, a live with Clive Myrie or Rita Chakrabarti from Lviv, or it could be, you know, Ola Guerin at the front line, or Lise Doucette. And that could be on that day or just a couple of days afterwards. And that's the speed that has changed as a result of technology in terms of journalism, if you look at it from that perspective. But if you look at it also from how we, you know, choose our news, then obviously that has changed a lot because of the fact that there are so many more citizen journalists out there. You know, people are filming and posting about their own, you know, what they're witnessing themselves, essentially. And so we're picking that up as well. We're watching those trends. And then that influences what we do as newsmakers and what we report as well. So there's a real, you know, shift actually in terms of the news story that you may see now compared to what you'd have seen before. And I find that really exciting, especially in the role that I do now. Because it's about the diversity of voice. And one of the things that social media does provide is an opportunity to hear more voices. And that's something we're seeing kind of translating back into the news world.
How can traditional news channels like BBC News keep up with the growing popularity of social media platforms like Twitter and TikTok?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the BBC News, which, you know, people call legacy, a legacy brand, and keeping up with what's changing and that revolution that is taking place is obviously extremely important. One of the things that we're really acutely aware of is that, you know, we need to ensure that we are servicing everyone. It's part of the BBC's mandate to service everyone in the UK. And if we're not reaching younger audiences or those who are using social media as their main primary way of getting news, then we're not necessarily fulfilling our obligations. So BBC News are clearly very aware of this, and so we have a very huge dedicated team to making that happen. And we've just actually, in the last couple of weeks, BBC News has just entered the TikTok space. We've got it all signed off by Ofcom and so on, and the different regulatory bodies. So that's something that's quite exciting to see where that ends up. But one of the things that, when you talk about BBC News channel specifically, one of the things that you'll see is that there's been a kind of a restructure within BBC News. So what's happening is that we are creating story kind of hubs, if that makes sense. So, you know, say using the Ukraine example, there'll be a kind of a central team, and what they'll be doing is they'll be looking at that story of the day, and then they'll be kind of looking at the elements that are coming in, so through the news gathering kind of side of things, and then going, right, okay, well, actually, you know, if we tweak that a little bit, that will work very well for this audience on TikTok, or if we tweak it slightly this way, it will work for our, you know, Twitter followers, and actually if we leave it straight like this, then that's going to work for the news channel. So what's happening is actually the same news is almost being disseminated to all the different outlets. It's just how we're telling the stories is different depending on the audience that we're trying to engage with, and that's quite a little nuanced change that's happened, because before what we used to do on social media is we used to take clips off BBC News channel and just stick them on Twitter and Instagram, and they wouldn't pick up. Whereas now we're going, right, actually, what does this audience need? And then we're changing it and moving it. In terms of the news channel itself, it takes a lot from social media, especially when you're looking at things like breaking news stories, because we often are not in that space at that time. So we need to be looking at what people who are there are putting out in social. It's called user-generated content. And we have a dedicated team that look at that, verify it, and then it can get used in those breaking news scenarios. And I always just think about, some people think that news channels have kind of had their day, whereas you look at something like COVID, you look at Ukraine, you look at those big moments, and people will turn off their phones and they will turn on the telly, or they'll turn to radio, because they want the live and continuous updates. And you're seeing those audiences still peaking around 10 million. So they're still really, really important for that public service side of news that the BBC is great at doing.
What has the BBC's 50/50 initiative achieved so far?
Yeah, well, this is a little bit like my baby, so so I might start gushing a little bit. I apologise. But I mean, the 50/50 Equality Project, it did start with us as journalists in the heart of the London newsroom. It started with one presenter, TV news presenter Ros Atkins, and his show Outside Source, and this was back in 2017. In 2016, he was listening to a BBC radio station. He didn't hear a female voice for a very long time, and he thought, how can that be in this day and age? So he took it upon himself to come up with the core principles of 50/50 that we use today. And now 50/50 is the BBC's biggest collective action when it comes to increasing women's representation that there's ever been. And it's not the BBC doing it on its own. We've got more than 140 organisations taking part, 29 different countries across the globe. And at the heart of it, it's about data. So what we do is, me, lonely journalist on the 6 and 10 o'clock news, back in the day, I would be assigned to watch our programme as it was going out or close afterwards, and count the number of men and number of women on our programme. And what we would be doing is looking to see if we could reach 50% women's representation over a set period of time. So for a daily programme, it would be over a month. And we have 3 kind of core principles: data to affect change. The second one is that you count what you control. And this is really important because, you can't change what you can't control. And so for us, we would remove from our monitoring kind of core characters. So like, for example, if the British Prime Minister is talking about COVID, we're going to have to include Boris Johnson in our piece. So we won't count him because we can't change the fact that he's the British Prime Minister. And that was the same when Theresa May was Prime Minister. We didn't count her either. So it's about the characters who we can control, the political commentators, the artists, the case studies, that kind of thing. So we're trying to reach 50% women in that space. But we have a third core principle, which is the golden rule. We never compromise on quality. The whole point of 50/50 is that we're trying to enrich our storytelling by adding diversity of voice, by bringing female voices in to our content. And, the actual editorial has to be paramount in everything that we do. It's not a quota system. It's not about reaching 50% women for reaching that target. And I think one of the things that I hope our audiences are seeing, and they say that they are when we do our surveys, is that they're enjoying our content more because they're hearing that diversity of voice. So we are currently in March 2022, we are currently in a challenge month. And this is when the BBC and its partner organisations publish their figures and how they're doing. So I can't tell you what we're doing right now, but last year at the BBC, 70% of our teams reached 50% women representation in March, compared to 36% when they first joined the project. And for our partner organisations, which it's not just media, we've got law firms, we've got academic universities, we've got corporate organizations, anywhere that you can count and monitor content, we're doing it. So those partner organizations last year, half of them reached 50% women representation, up from a third. So you're seeing a real kind of difference just by doing something as simple as counting what your content looks like And then essentially you share that with your team, you look at the gap, and then you make the change. But you have to keep doing it. And that's the thing that's the most important, because you can't stand still. You know, society is changing, and how we reflect organizations are changing. So we have to keep that counting going.
How can channels like BBC News better represent the British public?
Yeah, well, there are other ways of using 50-50 than just increasing women's representation. And that includes something that we started back in October 2020. And that is rolling out that data idea to increase disability and ethnic minority representation. So we're doing the same counting idea and looking to increase that representation. We're using the BBC's overall UK target for reflecting society at the moment, which is 50-20-12. So 50% women's representation, 20% ethnic minority representation, and 12% disabled representation. But what we're doing with that is that we're changing it depending on, you know, where our particular content makers are and who their audiences are. So for example, BBC Scotland wouldn't be aiming for 20% ethnic minority representation because their population is only 8% from ethnic minority backgrounds. Whereas in BBC London, half of London's population are from an ethnic minority background. So they'll be aiming for 50%. So we're flexing and changing what people are aiming for so that they're reflecting their audience in their particular content. And one of the things that I'm excited that we're going to be starting this year as well is using the idea of monitoring data to see if we can better reflect socioeconomic diversity. So this is a new pilot that's been done by the 6 and 10 bulletins that go out on BBC One. So we'll have to watch this space and see how it goes. But the point of all of this is that by understanding where you are right now, understanding kind of the gaps in, you know, whose voices you're not covering, you can think about what your editorial looks like, and you can think about the stories that you're telling, and then you can shift it so that you're better reflecting society.